The regional sales manager reviewed the contract one final time before signing. The hotel chain had submitted an excellent proposal for the championship weekend. 23 properties across the metropolitan area would accommodate visiting teams, media personnel, corporate sponsors, and thousands of fans. The pricing was competitive, the amenities were appropriate, and the chain's track record for handling major sporting events was solid. They had successfully hosted similar events in 6 other cities over the previous 3 years. The contract was approved, deposits were transferred, and advance teams began coordinating logistics for what would become the largest sporting event the city had ever hosted. 3 weeks before the championship weekend, that signature would place 47,000 people inside a coordinated terrorist attack designed to cause mass casualties and destroy public confidence in large-scale events. Premier Sports Hospitality had entered the market 8 years earlier, with a specialized focus on sporting event accommodations. The company owned and operated 41 properties strategically located in cities with major sports franchises, convention centers, and entertainment districts. Their business model emphasized corporate partnerships, team contracts, and volume bookings during major events. The hotels were modern, well-maintained, and professionally staffed. Guest reviews were consistently positive. Industry associations recognized Premier Sports Hospitality with awards for operational excellence. Major sports leagues, entertainment companies, and corporate event planners regularly selected their properties for important bookings. Everything about the company suggested a legitimate hospitality operation successfully serving a specialized market niche. The founder had built the company's reputation through careful attention to the specific needs of sports-related events. Teams appreciated the consistent quality across multiple cities. Event organizers valued the centralized booking process that simplified logistics. Fans enjoyed amenities specifically designed for sports travel. The business had grown steadily, and the company's valuation had reached $800 million. Financial analysts viewed Premier Sports Hospitality as a well-positioned player in the experiential hospitality sector. Investors praised the founder's vision and execution. The company appeared to be exactly what its marketing materials claimed: a hospitality brand built by sports fans for sports fans. But Premier Sports Hospitality was not what it appeared to be. The company had been established specifically to gain access to large concentrations of people during high-profile events. The properties were real hotels operating legitimate businesses. But embedded within the infrastructure of 23 specific locations were explosive devices powerful enough to collapse major sections of the buildings. The devices had been installed during construction or renovation projects over a 5-year period. They were integrated into structural elements in ways that made them invisible during routine inspections or maintenance. And they were designed to be triggered simultaneously during an event that would place maximum numbers of people inside the targeted properties at the same moment. The conspiracy traced back to a domestic terrorism network that had evolved from online radicalization into operational capability. The organization's ideology centered on anti-government extremism, combined with accelerationist beliefs that societal collapse would create opportunities for fundamental restructuring. Their previous activities had been limited to rhetoric and small-scale vandalism. But a core group within the network had spent years planning an operation that would demonstrate their capability to cause mass casualties and trigger nationwide panic. The acquisition and operation of Premier Sports Hospitality had provided the access, legitimacy, and time and control needed to execute an attack far beyond anything domestic extremists had previously achieved. The plan was methodical and patient. The network had used legitimate business structures and financing to acquire existing hotel properties and develop new ones. They had hired professional hospitality management teams who operated the hotels without any knowledge of the hidden purpose. The explosive devices were installed by a small group of individuals with military and demolition backgrounds who operated under cover of legitimate construction and maintenance crews. The devices were sophisticated, designed to remain dormant for years until triggered remotely. Each device was positioned to cause catastrophic structural failure that would trap and kill large numbers of people. The coordination required to place 23 devices across multiple cities without detection represented years of planning and substantial financial investment. The target selection was deliberate. The extremist network had chosen to trigger the attack during a major championship weekend that would place tens of thousands of people inside premier sports hospitality properties simultaneously. Teams, media, sponsors, and fans would be concentrated in the targeted hotels. The timing was set for late evening when maximum occupancy was certain. The simultaneous detonations across multiple properties would overwhelm emergency response systems and create mass panic. The projected casualties ran into the thousands. The psychological impact of discovering that trusted hotels had been weaponized would devastate public confidence in large-scale events, and the economic disruption would extend far beyond the immediate destruction. The first indication of the threat came from an intercepted communication that was initially flagged for unrelated reasons. The NSA had been monitoring online activities of individuals connected to extremist networks when analysts noticed encrypted messages that referenced specific dates, locations, and operational language. The content was ambiguous enough that it could have been legitimate business discussions, but certain phrases triggered additional scrutiny. When analysts cross-referenced the communication participants with business ownership records, they discovered connections to premier sports hospitality. The discovery prompted immediate notification to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. Federal investigators began examining premier sports hospitality with intense scrutiny. The company's ownership structure led through layers of shell corporations and trusts that concealed the identities of ultimate beneficial owners. Financial analysis revealed cash flows that seemed inconsistent with typical hospitality operations, and background investigations of key personnel identified individuals with connections to extremist networks. The initial evidence was circumstantial, but concerning enough to justify expanded investigation. The FBI faced a challenge. They needed to determine whether Premier Sports Hospitality was actually involved in a terrorist plot or whether the suspicious indicators were coincidental. The answer would determine whether thousands of people faced imminent danger. The breakthrough came from physical surveillance and technical operations. FBI agents conducted covert entries into several Premier Sports Hospitality properties during times when the buildings were lightly occupied. Using specialized detection equipment, they discovered anomalies in structural elements that should not have existed in modern hotel construction. Further investigation with more sophisticated imaging technology revealed the explosive devices. The devices were professionally constructed, integrated into building systems in ways that made them appear to be legitimate structural or utility components, and equipped with receivers for remote detonation. The FBI had confirmed an active terrorist plot with devices already in place. The scope of the threat became clear as investigators examined additional properties. 23 of the 41 Premier Sports Hospitality hotels contained explosive devices. All 23 were located in cities hosting events during the upcoming championship weekend. The correlation was unmistakable. The terrorists had positioned their weapons exactly where they needed them for a coordinated mass casualty attack. The FBI estimated that if the attack proceeded as apparently planned, casualties would exceed 4,000 people, with thousands more injured. The structural collapses would trap victims in rubble, complicate rescue operations, and the simultaneous nature of the attacks would overwhelm emergency response capabilities across multiple cities. The investigation also revealed the attack timeline. Intercepted communications suggested activation was planned for the Saturday evening of the championship weekend, specifically between 10 p.m. and midnight, when hotel occupancy would be at its peak. The FBI had 17 days to neutralize 23 explosive devices hidden in occupied hotels across 12 cities, identify and arrest the members of the terrorist network, and do so without triggering premature detonation or causing mass panic. The operational complexity was unprecedented. Explosive ordnance disposal teams would need to work in occupied buildings without alerting guests or terrorists monitoring the properties. The coordination would require hundreds of agents deployed simultaneously across 12 cities, and the margin for error was essentially zero. The Joint Terrorism Task Force developed a plan that prioritized victim safety while maintaining operational security. Rather than attempt to disarm devices in occupied hotels, which would risk premature detonation or discovery by terrorists monitoring their preparations, the FBI would execute a coordinated operation that would secure all 23 properties simultaneously, evacuate guests under pretext unrelated to terrorism, and then disable the devices in empty buildings. The operation would require manufacturing reasons to close 23 hotels at the same time without revealing the true cause. The cover story developed was a fictional natural gas leak detection program that required emergency inspections of commercial properties built during a specific time frame. The story was thin, but it would only need to hold for the hours required to complete the operation. The plan also required identifying and arresting the members of the terrorist network before they could trigger the devices remotely. Surveillance had identified 37 individuals connected to the plot through various roles: leadership, technical support, logistics, and monitoring. The FBI would need to locate and arrest all of them simultaneously to prevent any from activating the explosives during the hotel evacuations. 17 days of intensive investigation mapped the network structure, identified the locations of key members, and prepared tactical teams for coordinated arrests across 8 states. The complexity extended to the operational security required to prevent the terrorists from discovering the FBI investigation. Premier Sports Hospitality's computer systems were almost certainly compromised, with the network monitoring reservations, occupancy, and potentially security camera feeds. The FBI had to conduct their preparations without using any communications or actions that would appear in systems the terrorists might access. Coordination occurred through secure channels, completely separate from standard law enforcement networks. Agents working the case were instructed to avoid any digital or electronic activity that could indicate law enforcement interest in Premier Sports Hospitality or the championship weekend events. The compartmentalization was total. On the morning of March 9th, 14 days before the scheduled championship weekend, FBI tactical teams executed the coordinated operation. At exactly 6 a.m. local time in each city, agents entered all 23 Premier Sports Hospitality properties under the cover of emergency gas safety inspections. Hotel management teams who had no knowledge of the terrorist plot cooperated with what they believed were legitimate safety officials. Guests were informed of the required evacuation. and were relocated to other hotels with their expenses covered by what appeared to be a government emergency response program. Within 4 hours, all 23 properties were empty. Explosive ordnance disposal teams moved in to begin the painstaking process of disabling devices that had been designed to resist tampering. Simultaneously, FBI tactical teams across 8 states executed arrest operations targeting the 37 individuals identified as members of the terrorist network. The coordination was precise. Residences, workplaces, and vehicles were secured within minutes of each other. The network's leadership was arrested before they could issue any emergency orders. Technical personnel who maintained the remote detonation systems were taken into custody before they could trigger the devices. Lower-level members who provided logistical support were secured before they could warn others. The operation represented one of the largest coordinated terrorism arrests in domestic law enforcement history. The explosive devices required 3 days of intensive work to disable safely. Each device was photographed, documented, and analyzed before disposal experts attempted to neutralize it. Several devices included anti-tampering mechanisms that would trigger detonation if improper disarming techniques were used. 2 devices were so sensitive that they required controlled detonations in place, which was accomplished by structurally reinforcing the surrounding areas and using precise demolition techniques to ensure the blasts were contained. The technical sophistication of the devices indicated professional military or demolition expertise. Each one contained sufficient explosive material to cause catastrophic structural failure in a major section of a hotel building. The total explosive yield across all 23 devices was equivalent to what might be used in a major military operation. The investigation into the terrorist network revealed the full scope of their planning and objectives. The group had spent 8 years and approximately $60 million building premier sports hospitality specifically for this attack. The investment had purchased legitimacy, access, and the operational capability to cause mass casualties. Internal communications recovered from defendants showed that the network viewed the attack as necessary to trigger social collapse and governmental crisis. They calculated that thousands of deaths combined with the discovery that a major hotel chain had been weaponized would destroy public confidence in large events, trigger authoritarian security measures that would radicalize moderates, and create conditions they could exploit to advance their extremist ideology. The psychological manipulation was as calculated as the explosive placement. The trial evidence included detailed attack plans, financial records showing how the network had funded the operation, and communications between members discussing target selection and anticipated casualties. One particularly damning document outlined post-attack media strategies designed to maximize fear and social division. The terrorists had planned to release statements claiming responsibility and threatening additional attacks at other major event venues. Their goal was not just mass casualties, but sustained psychological terror that would fundamentally alter how Americans experienced public gatherings and entertainment. The prosecution used these documents to demonstrate that the defendants had planned mass murder as a tool for political and social manipulation. The sentences were severe. The network's leaders received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Technical specialists who had installed the explosive devices received sentences ranging from 50 to 70 years. Other members who had provided support or resources received 20 to 40 years. The court heard testimony from experts who calculated that if the attack had succeeded, the death toll would have been the highest from a domestic terrorism incident in American history. The emotional impact statements from individuals who had planned to attend the championship weekend events, stay in the targeted hotels, or work in the properties provided personal dimensions to the abstract casualty projections. The sports leagues, entertainment companies, and corporate sponsors who had contracted with Premier Sports Hospitality faced difficult questions about due diligence and vendor security. The company had appeared legitimate by all standard measures. Background checks had not revealed connections to extremist networks because ownership was hidden behind layers of corporate structures. Financial audits had shown a profitable hospitality operation. Security assessments had found no obvious vulnerabilities. The terrorists had invested years in building and maintaining legitimacy, specifically to defeat normal vetting processes. Preventing similar operations would require fundamentally different approaches to vendor security for major events. The hospitality industry implemented comprehensive changes in response to the case. Enhanced background checks became mandatory for ownership and senior management of hotels hosting major events. Structural inspections were expanded to include detection equipment for concealed explosives or weapons. Law enforcement agencies established permanent liaisons with major hotel chains to facilitate rapid information sharing about potential threats. And event organizers developed protocols for rapidly relocating or canceling events if credible threats emerged. The changes increased operational costs and complexity, but the alternative was unacceptable risk to public safety. The cities that had been targeted held remembrance events acknowledging what had been prevented. Officials, terrorism survivors from other incidents, and FBI agents who worked the case spoke about resilience, community cooperation, and the importance of vigilance. The events served to recognize the narrow escape from catastrophe while reinforcing that prevention required ongoing attention to threats. The FBI agents who had first identified the suspicious communications received awards for their analytical work. The terrorism analyst who had made the initial connection between extremist chatter and Premier Sports Hospitality business records was recognized by the intelligence community for exceptional service. The championship weekend proceeded as scheduled with extensive security measures. The sports leagues made the decision to continue with the events as a statement that terrorism would not dictate how Americans live their lives. Fans were informed about what had been prevented and given options to modify or cancel their plans without penalty. Remarkably, attendance was only slightly lower than projected. The decision to proceed became its own form of resilience, demonstrating that the public would not be paralyzed by fear even after learning how close they had come to a major terrorist attack. The properties owned by Premier Sports Hospitality were sold by the federal government after asset forfeiture proceedings. The name was permanently banned from use in the hospitality industry. The buildings themselves were thoroughly inspected. Any remaining concerns were addressed, and they were transferred to legitimate hotel operators. Some retained their previous brand affiliations after security certifications. Others were rebranded entirely. The physical infrastructure had been tools of terrorism, but after remediation they returned to their intended purpose of serving travelers and guests. The financial investigation recovered approximately $30 million in assets from the terrorist network and Premier Sports Hospitality's operations. The recovered funds were dedicated to victim compensation programs, counterterrorism research, and security enhancement grants for venues hosting large-scale events. While no victims had been physically harmed because the attack was prevented, thousands of individuals who would have been in the targeted hotels received acknowledgement of the threat they had unknowingly faced and the trauma of learning how close they had come to being casualties. The counterterrorism community studied the case intensively to understand how a domestic extremist network had achieved the sophistication, patience, and resources to plan such an elaborate operation. The 8-year timeline represented a level of operational discipline unusual for domestic terrorists. The $60 million investment demonstrated access to funding sources that required investigation, and the technical capability to install and conceal 23 explosive devices suggested either recruited expertise or training from foreign terrorist organizations. The case prompted reassessment of domestic terrorism threat analysis and resource allocation. The international dimension emerged when investigators traced funding to overseas sources. The domestic network had received financial support from entities in 3 countries sharing their ideology. The FBI shared intelligence with international partners, leading to additional investigations and disruption of funding networks supporting multiple extremist operations. For the NSA analysts who had first flagged the suspicious communications, the FBI operation represented validation of their work in a field where successes often went unacknowledged. Terrorism prevention rarely generates headlines when it succeeds because the public never experiences the threat. The analysts had identified an ambiguous pattern, pursued it despite uncertainty, and helped prevent what would have been a catastrophic attack. Their contribution was recognized within the intelligence community, but they understood that the most important outcome was the thousands of people who would attend the championship weekend events safely because the terrorist plot had been discovered and neutralized. Today, the hospitality industry operates with security consciousness that was unusual before the premier sports hospitality case. Major hotels serving large events maintain relationships with law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Structural security assessments have become routine, and the industry shares threat intelligence through secure networks that allow rapid dissemination of concerning information. The changes have become normalized to the point where they are largely invisible to guests, but they represent a permanent shift in how the sector approaches security. The FBI prevented a catastrophic attack and in doing so transformed how America protects people during their most celebratory moments.